Hello and welcome to the Power Grid, the Footballguys.com DFS show. We air it as a video on our YouTube channel. We air it as an audio show on our Audible feed. And I'm your host, Austin Lee. I'm joined, as always, by Devin Knotts, Ryan Hester, and John Lee. Glad to have you guys back in the saddle here tonight, guys. John, you went to the FanDuel Live Finals last year, so I just imagine your summer after the NFL season has been sipping champagne in the jacuzzi, living it up, eating caviar. Tell us about your rich, filled summer.
I didn't have any of those things. I had some cheap beer and did some house renovations. It was pretty boring, and the money's gone, so we're back this year and ready to try to capitalize once again.
That's how we draw John back in year after year. We make sure he spends all his winnings during the summer, so he has to come back. So glad to have you, buddy.
I'm happy to be here.
Devin, looks like your hair has not grown back in from the Ladarius Green bet last year. What's going on there? Do you just like it short now?
Yeah, John taught me a pretty good lesson to keep the hair short, and no more one-sided bets this year. John's going to have to risk something if he's going to want something this year.
I like that. That's excellent. And we've got Ryan Hester, who was a guest a couple times last year, but this year he's an every week guy. We're very excited to have him added to the show. Ryan, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here, and I can't wait for a long season of having fun and hopefully some fun two-sided bets.
Yes, I like fun two-sided bets. And Jeff Pasquina will be joining us next week. He is off on assignment this week. So let's dive into this, guys. It's preseason week 2, and we're going to be looking at just the main slate. So that's only the games on Saturday night, August 19th. So that's half the games for this week. Let's dive into some of the stories that we see in this week's preseason. Devin, I'll pitch it to you first. Of these kind of top stories you see in the games, is there anything that jumps out at you that you're looking for in preseason week 2?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think the biggest thing for me is how good Mitchell Trubisky looked in the Bears' first game. He looked very calm and collected, which to me was more beneficial than just the stats. I think we'll be bringing his name up later. But as someone who's in Chicago, I can tell, and not a Bears fan, I can tell you that I was very impressed by Trubisky. And he's gotten a lot of talk as potentially being a starter sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that's definitely a storyline to follow in the preseason. Ryan, which of these games has something you're looking for?
Well, I mean, I just like looking at all the young players and all the position battles, of course. So, this will be the only time we say it all year, but I guess kind of Jets-Lions I'm looking forward to. The only time we'll say the Jets, right? Because let's just knock that out right now. But the Jets are clearly a team not playing for this year, so they're full of young guys that they're going to want to get a look at. It might be one team in the NFL that actually wants to win their preseason game. So, a guy like Robbie Anderson, maybe Elijah McGuire at running back. Who knows? They're still working out their quarterback situation. Nobody believes in Christian Hackenberg, but maybe he'll prove somebody wrong. Who knows?
I just saw a football fly by my window. It might have been him, Christian right? Hackenberg.
And then Kenny Golladay on the Detroit side is a guy who's just been blowing up camp there, so I'm excited to watch him again.
Yeah, that may be the last time we get excited for a Jets-Lions game. John, what is a storyline in preseason week 2 that you're looking forward to?
I don't know. I think this Houston-New England game looks like it might be interesting. Last week, we don't have a whole lot of information to work off here, but the one thing that we can take from last week's game, these two teams gave up almost 60 points combined, and they both looked pretty good on offense as well. Houston's got some young talent there in the form of Deshaun Watson, Deontay Foreman. Like to see them go up against Bill Belichick and whatever he's going to put on the field this weekend. And then, of course, the opposite end of that comes into play with the Patriots. They had a very limited number of skill players on the field last week, which made for some nice fantasy goodness from that team. And, they'll go up against Houston, I believe in Houston, as it were. So that's a game that, preseason doesn't excite me too much, but that's one that I think that I will be watching fairly closely.
And I think that the low number of players the Patriots put on the field, like you said, is going to lead to some more preseason fantasy goodness this coming weekend, which takes us to our chalk plays. Let's look at the Black Eyed Joe signs here for a second. Is there going to be a player that's more highly owned than Jimmy Garoppolo? He seems to be a guy who's going to be super crazy high owned. Would you say there's a player that's going to be higher owned than Jimmy Garoppolo? All right, let's kick it over to we got John and Ryan saying yes, there'll be a player that's higher owned than Jimmy Garoppolo, and Devin and I are saying no. Ryan, who do you think is going to be higher owned than Jimmy Garoppolo?
I'll stay at the same position and say even maybe in the same game, Deshaun Watson. He had a pretty electric touchdown run last week. And, not to hedge, but Devin mentioned Mitch Trubisky earlier as well, who had a nice game. So people maybe just looking at stat lines, doing their research, might see those guys.
Yeah, and I think those are probably the three highest owned quarterbacks of the week. John, did you have any different players in mind for high ownership?
I think the guy that will be the highest owned player on the weekend has already been mentioned in the show, and that's Kenny Golladay. Coming off of a 2-touchdown weekend, he's getting all sorts of hype. I'm reading today that he's practicing with the first team starters. People aren't going to forget this guy. He is an electric talent, and I think that folks are going to want to try to capitalize on what he did last week. But from an efficiency perspective, he only had 4 targets. He caught 3 of them, 2 for touchdowns. I might be on a full fade of him this week because I think his ownerships will be that high.
And I think in the preseason, you're going to see a lot of that bias from the previous week carry over into the following week, and that might give you an opportunity to lower some of your sort of ownership percentages on some of these guys to find a lower owned lineup.
So one thing about Golladay real quick is that those touchdowns may be a little abnormal. Dating back to college, he wasn't a prolific touchdown player. He had 8 touchdowns last year, which was fine. He was more of a volume guy, but really wasn't a prolific touchdown maker. So I think the fade could make sense if he's going to be that highly owned.
Yeah. Before we finish out with some other chalk plays, let's talk a little bit about general preseason strategy. John, I'll pitch this to you first. What kind of things do you think about in preseason that makes this game a little bit different than playing in week 1 regular season DFS?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest number one factor is just opportunity. You really have to try to find out who's going to play in these games. I mean, when we're playing during the regular season, you know who's going to be on the field throughout the game, barring anything unforeseen in terms of injuries or game script. But with preseason, week 2, what are we going to see? These first teamers might be out there for 2 to 3 sets of downs at the most, and then we're bringing in second string. And you have to be aware and cognizant of what's going on with regards to camp battles, players who are on the roster bubble. And the only way to really do this is to follow beat writers and training camp reports. We'll talk more about those, I'm sure, throughout the show. But you need to be aware of all of these things. And that information is not readily accessible, at least not in one place. And, this is one of the attempts we're trying to do tonight to try to share that with our listeners and subscribers, is to try to break down some of those things and make sure that we're gaining exposure to players who, for me, I'm looking for at least a third of the game, a third of the offensive snaps. But certainly if you can get above that, you really increase your chances of rostering a player who might find himself in a situation where he could put up some fantasy points.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point about Footballguys training camp reports. Every week on Wednesdays, there's like a 40-page drop of a document that has all kinds of training camp information that's technically not DFS specific, but it's really helpful for these preseason DFS lineup builds. And all the prices are the same in preseason, both at FanDuel and at DraftKings. So you're not really worried about value of a player. You're just looking for the guys who are going to actually get the minutes. Devin, do you have any other tips for preseason strategy in DFS?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is, in a GPP, I'll typically stack a quarterback and wide receiver. You really don't have to do that in the preseason. And the reason is that, it's certainly a viable option, starting a starting quarterback with a starting receiver, definitely a viable option. But at the same time, it's there's so many different players that are out there that are playing that could potentially score touchdowns. I'm either looking for volume, as John said, so we'll get into running backs who could get volume later, but either volume or the opportunities to score a touchdown. So one of those two things, if a player doesn't have a great chance of doing either, then I don't care if they play two or three quarters, but I really want to see when they're in the game, are they utilized?
Yeah, that's a great point. Ryan, I'll pitch it to you to wrap up kind of our preseason strategy section here. Is there any other tips you would give people for approaching a preseason DFS?
Sure. Opportunity is king, like the guy said. So, you want to look at teams and where they're at, right? So you want to note team situations. If you look at a more veteran, established team like New England or like Green Bay, these guys, they know who they are. They know they don't need these games. So, you're not going to see Aaron Rodgers. You're not going to see Jordy Nelson. Not only are you not going to see them for more than a series, you're probably not going to see them at all. These guys just are looking for, players 50 through 53 on their roster. They're not looking at anything above that. Whereas younger teams, they're looking at guys that are rookies that we kind of talked about earlier, Kenny Golladay types, position battles. So, just note the team before you go in and look at the name in the preseason.
Yeah, it seems like inexperienced players get more run. Sometimes players are played more if they're trade bait, or guys on the roster bubble, like you said, are getting those looks to try to make the team. Jumping back a little bit to our chalk plays, speaking of rookies maybe getting more playing time, do you think that Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals will be a highly owned player this week? Devin, I'll kick it back to you. Do you think Mixon is a strong play this week?
Do I think he'll be highly owned? Yeah, I do. Do I think he's a strong play? I don't typically like to starting running backs in these types of games because they're always overpopular because you have the guys who just want to start their starters and watch the first quarter of the game and get all their points early, and then they just kind of fall down the leaderboard. So I found that they're typically over-owned. So I'm probably out on Mixon. Watch him score 2 touchdowns despite me, but I just don't see him needing to play that much compared to a normal rookie who's in a position battle. It seems like Mixon kind of already has his role figured out.
Yep, that makes sense. John and Ryan are both flashing up their green Black-Eyed Joe signs in agreement with Devin. Ryan, let me ask you, are there any other running backs that you think will be highly owned or as chalk plays this week?
I do. And then one last thing on Mixon for
Sure.
Our season-long folks that are watching, just something that you want to kind of gather from the preseason, right? So Mixon showed really well last week. There was a lot of hype. If he plays less this week, I actually think that that's great for his prospects. I think that he's earning his position as a starter. They maybe don't want to wear him down. So it's just something to watch with playing time for him and for others as well. But, moving on, I think you might see a lot of Dion Lewis in New England. He had I think it was maybe 4 catches in week 1. James White seems to be ahead of him in terms of their pass catching back role. And as we talked earlier, they're a team that they're just not going to play their starters very much, if at all. So Lewis is a backup, and he's a very capable one. The guy was an RB1 a couple years ago before his injury. So he's somebody that'll be highly owned and might be a good play.
Yeah. John, how about at wide receiver or tight end? Are there guys that stand out to you as players who are going to be really heavily owned, and will you own them?
Yeah, I don't think that there are, outside of Kenny Golladay, as I've already talked about, I don't think that there's any one particular player at the wide receiver tight end position that's going to be through the roof level ownership. Maybe a guy like Cody Latimer, I think, could be fairly highly owned after what he did last week. He was targeted 7 times, caught 7 passes for 54 yards, which doesn't sound like a lot if we're talking about, quote, normal football. But in the preseason, those are pretty impressive numbers. He's always been a fan favorite as well, and people like to root for him. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's up there. And, in our show sheet here, we have Kendrick Bourne there in San Francisco. Last week, he was targeted 7 times as well. He pulled in 4 catches for 88 yards and a score. So he's another guy that people will be looking at. But I think overall, the key here, as we've already said, is finding guys who you think who have volume potential and can score. And, for me, I really think that you can justify a number of players who don't fall into this high ownership category.
Yeah, I'm going to have a tough time not rostering multiple Patriots on my team. I think Jacob Hollister of New England, he had 7 catches for 116 yards last week at tight end. I think he'll probably be the highest owned tight end this week. I would have said Rico Gathers of Dallas, but he entered the concussion protocol and probably won't play this week. Keep an eye on that if you're thinking of using Rico Gathers, who's been tearing it up this preseason so far. Let's talk about quarterbacks. John, I'll pitch this to you. Are there any other quarterbacks that stand out to you that aren't going to be chalk plays like we mentioned? We're going to kind of take those guys off the table. Are there other guys digging a little deeper that would be interesting to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll name a couple GPP type quarterbacks. I think one guy we can look at is Drew Stanton. Last week he had a really nice week against who the heck was it? Against the Raiders. He was in a battle with Blaine Gabbert, and I think he came out on top. He was 11 for 15, threw for over 100 yards, had a touchdown, and looked really good while Gabbert looked bad. And they're going to need to know who the number 2 quarterback there is in Arizona. So I suspect he'll continue to get opportunity this week. He's going up against Chicago, who gave up 24 points last week. So he's a guy that's kind of under the radar I wouldn't mind thinking about. And another guy that I think nobody will have is Jeff Driscoll, who looked really good last week. He was 8 for 9, threw for a touchdown. He ran for a touchdown. He scrambled 5 different times. Doing the math really quickly in my head, he had over 20 fantasy points. So in preseason, I think that's pretty impressive. And he goes up against a Kansas City Chiefs defense that allowed 27 points last week, which in preseason is a lot. So those are a couple guys that I think have some high upside, and they're in situations where they should see sufficient playing time based on their week 1 performances to merit maybe giving them another shot here in week 2.
Jeff Driscoll's the guy I have my eye on in GPPs for sure. The Chiefs just got steamrolled by the Niners offense last week. The Niners running backs all had a field day. The play counts were really lopsided. The Niners ran about 20 more offensive plays than the Chiefs. If the Chiefs defense, has another day like they did last week, then we could see a lot of offensive action out of Driscoll and the Bengals. Let's move on to running backs here. I'll pitch it to you, Ryan. Is there a running back that stands out to you as a guy you're looking to play outside of kind of the chalk guys that we mentioned? Joe Mixon, Dion Lewis are kind of the 2 guys we mentioned at the top of the show. Are there any other running backs you like?
Yeah, I'll kind of name a couple. I mean, I talked a little bit earlier about older guys, and we got to watch these injury situations. This will be the second and hopefully final time I mention the Jets all season. But Matt Forte and Bilal Powell are both hurt. Neither are looking like they're going to play. So Elijah McGuire is a rookie. That's exciting there. And Jordan Todman is a journeyman who could show up in the second half and do some mop-up duty.
John, is there a running back that stands out to you out of this motley crew of guys trying to make teams?
Yeah, I don't know if there's one that stands out to me that I absolutely love, but I've got my eye on several. I think I mentioned already Dante Foreman against New England. He looked really good in week 1. He played about 30% of the snaps. They're going to want to know, is he the backup there? Or are they still going to rely on Alfred Blue? I think so. He'll continue to get that type of work. And New England did not look good on defense in week number 1. So he's a guy that I'll have a little bit of exposure to. One of the big things in preseason is trying to find scores. And the one guy that I think will go under own this week is Zach Zenner. Everything I've read about camp so far, Zach Zenner has been in on goal line duties without exception. And so, if he gets in there, if the Lions march down, they get inside the 5, it's going to be Zenner who's getting the ball. And even if he only has 5 carries, if one of those is in for a touchdown, that's a pretty good preseason score. So don't sleep on Zach Zenner this week, because it's not Matt Asiata, as many of us thought in the offseason, who's getting that goal line action. And then maybe just one that's kind of off the board in LA. Now I got to specify the Rams in LA. They have a number 1 running back, but the number 2 running back is still somewhat unclear entering the second week of the preseason. Both Malcolm Brown and Justin Davis are kind of duking it out there. And last week, both of them looked really good in terms of running, but both had some ball control issues. I believe that Justin Davis fumbled twice, losing one, and Mac Brown did the same. So this week, I think you could go either one, because these guys are going to have to be tested in game-time situations for their reliability. If you made me choose one, I'm going with Justin Davis over Malcolm Brown.
He was on my list too.
Yeah, I had him on my list too. That's the guy I would go with in that game. I've also got Benny Cunningham in Chicago, catching passes and rushing. He could be an interesting play. But you make a good point, John, that with the limited playing time that these guys are getting in preseason, you're targeting those scores even more than you would in a regular season game. So playing a goal line back or a bigger back isn't a bad idea here. Another guy that I have my eye on is in Denver. I like D'Angelo Henderson. Last week he had 8 touches for 55 yards and a touchdown. It's already been stated that Jamal Charles is ruled out for this game, and then Devontae Booker is obviously injured and may miss the beginning of the regular season. I don't see C.J. Anderson getting a lot of play here, so I think D'Angelo Henderson is the guy who's going to see the most action. Stephen Ridley may get action, but he won't do anything with it. I mean, he's kind of the case of the guy where it's like he may get some opportunities, but at 2 yards per carry and no touchdowns, that's not the kind of guy I want to invest in preseason.
Best touchdown dance in football.
What is his dance, Devin? Can you give
us
a
show
little
us?
Can we get a demo?
The room isn't big enough, but it's kick through the door, step through the door, touchdown.
I love it. I think we're gonna have to get like a full screen reenactment of that.
One of our bets this year will be a Stephen Ridley touchdown dance.
I like it. That's where I always headed. I like it.
and I want to see John Lee do Victor Cruz's salsa dance.
Yeah, I think winner picks touchdown dance for loser. Could be
yes.
Future.
That's it. I love it. We've got.
Right, I have one more running back that I want to mention. Alfred Morris. With the Ezekiel Elliott suspension, they're not going to want to run Darren McFadden out there too much. Alfred Morris last year in week 2 had 13 carries for 85 yards and a touchdown. So it seems as if he could have the potential to get a significant amount of carries. He still wants to continue his career and stay within the mix. So he's a guy that I really like this week.
Nice. Let's move on to wide receivers. Let's pick maybe 3 or 4 of these guys. We've already mentioned several guys. Ryan, is there a guy that we haven't mentioned yet that you like from the receiver bunch?
Yeah, I mean, the offense is terrible and kind of laughable, but it is preseason. So Cooper Kupp, the rookie for the Rams, we know they just traded for Sammy Watkins. He's hurt. Tavon Austin is also hurt, and Kupp lined up all over the place last week. So they're using him outside, using him inside. He had a lot of snaps, so he put up some decent numbers. I mean, so a couple catches, if he throws a touchdown in there, you're golden. So he'll be on the field. He's a guy I like.
Nice. John, do you have a receiver we haven't mentioned yet?
Yeah, I'm looking through my list. I think a guy like Deontay Thompson has had a really good camp there in Chicago. He's last week he saw almost 70% of the snaps for the Bears. They're definitely giving him a chance to play behind names like White and the other name. Thank you very much. They're giving him a chance to earn that role behind those two guys. So he's certainly somebody I'd be looking at this week. Outside of him, maybe in Green Bay, you got a couple no-name guys that will be low-owned. D'Angelo Yancey and Max McCaffrey both saw about 50% of the snaps. The thing about Green Bay is we know that Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, these guys have roster spots locked up. And they're not going to throw them out in the field. So they're going to let these young receivers go out there and really try to earn their keep. And so I like going after some of those guys, even above and beyond a Geronimo Allison, who has kind of earned his spot as well, I think. So don't sleep on some of those no-name guys in situations on teams where they're going to see a lot of time.
They also, Green Bay, have a rookie. Devin, you might have to help me. Is it Malachi Rogers? LSU guy?
Malachi Dupree. Sorry, I don't know where Rogers came from. Anyways, he's in the concussion protocol, and I had it in my notes, and I couldn't find his last name, but I did remember that. So that helps Yancey and McCaffrey even more. He plays for Green Bay, so just say everybody's a Rogers.
Exactly. All right, let's see. We mentioned a couple of tight ends off the top. If you've got a tight end you want to talk about, raise up your green Black Eye Joe sign there. Devin definitely does. John definitely does. We'll go to you first, Devin. Which tight end do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I want to mention a receiver real quick before I go to tight end since I was skipped. Dez Bryant. So Dez last year didn't play in week 3 because it was a road game. And he hasn't typically played in road games historically. He's played in home games. So he was someone who last year scored a touchdown in week 2, saw a significant amount of volume, could be a touchdown guy. Like I said, you're just trying to chase touchdowns, keep an update on the beat writers in case he's playing. If he's playing, he'll get some red zone looks. Going to tight end real quick. So Adam Shaheen is a guy I really like. He's roommates with Mitchell Trubisky. Shaheen is a player from Ashland University, small school in Ohio. He played basketball for 3 years at Pittsburgh State before going to Ashland. Had never played football before, at least not at a significantly high level, and only played in 2 years at Ashland. So he's a guy who is still learning the position. They drafted him, I believe, in the second round. So they're committed to this guy. He's being called Baby Gronk in camp and just tearing it up. So he's a guy who we could see get in the end zone this week.
I like it. And John, you had a tight end that you wanted to mention.
Before we do, I want to point out a little known fact that my first college baseball pitching experience was against the same Ashland University that Devin Knotts just mentioned. I got shelled in that game, for the record.
You should have just lied and said you pitched a no-hitter.
No, the internet tells too many truths these days. So for tight ends, 2 guys I'm looking at are names that you would know, but they're in situations where I think they need to be motivated and the team's going to give them a chance to do their thing. And so in San Francisco, I think Vance McDonald is a guy that's kind of on the roster bubble right now. And last week he saw just under 50% of the team's snaps. I suspect he'll be back on the field a lot this week. And, he's going to be out there trying to find space in the red zone. So he's a guy that I kind of like. And then in going back to Green Bay, Lance Kendricks, what we read in Footballguys training report this week is that the Packers are really focusing in on the tight end position inside the red zone this year. Obviously, Martellus Bennett's the guy that we'll be looking at in week 1, but in the preseason, they're likely going to go to his backup, and that's Lance Kendricks. So these 2 guys, I think, will be under-owned because they didn't do a whole lot last week, but they were both on the field for sufficient amount of time that I think that they could find themselves in touchdown situations if their teams get into the red zone.
Nice. Yeah, again, chasing those touchdowns in preseason is about the best bet you've got. Let's move on to defenses and kickers. We'll breeze through this real quick. I don't usually look at Vegas lines to help me with preseason picks because it's not as indicative of the entire game. It's more important, like how much playing time a particular player is going to get. But with defenses, Vegas likes Detroit and Dallas this week. They're both favored by 5.5 points. against the Jets and the Colts. Obviously Andrew Luck's not playing for the Colts, and the Jets are a hot mess. So I like Detroit and Dallas both at home this week. Devin, hit me with some kickers.
Yeah, I got two. So one of the things you want to be careful with kickers is make sure that they're kicking for the full game. For example, Dan Bailey last week, he kicked a field goal, but he did not kick an extra point. The punter actually kicked an extra point. So avoid those types of situations where we saw, hey, somebody else was kicking. It's just not worth it. Two guys that I like this week are Matt Prater and Adam Vinatieri. So we know that they're locked in. Older guys, so they're really have no competition around them. And they're both, I believe, they're both in offenses that should do relatively okay. It's hard to know in the preseason, but I think that they will want to get the older guys a little bit of work just to make sure that they're ready for the season.
And what do you think about Steven Gostkowski? I mean, we're talking about Patriots at just about every other position. Gostkowski was one of those kickers that seemed to not split time at that position. Is he worth a look?
Sure. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially if you're going to take a quarterback, why not take the kicker? Because if you get the yardage and they don't score, you're not as angry. So that's the way I do it, at least, just because it keeps my anger levels down. But nothing worse than not being able to punch it in from the 5-yard line and getting nothing out of the drive besides 0 yards. So in the preseason, just whatever offense you like. I mean, Gostkowski's fine.
Yeah, and watch out for those split kicker situations. Half of these teams had a split kicker situation in week 1 where one guy didn't do all the kicking. So research that a little bit and find the teams that didn't split that work.
One interesting point is it is a split kicker situation, but Roberto Aguayo was signed by the Bears. So they may try to give him some kicks to see how their new acquisition performs.
Well, he'd have to actually make them to score fantasy points, though.
Fair.
Poor Aguayo. Well, that about does it for our show, guys. I want to send it around the horn for parting thoughts here. If you've got any last-minute players or strategy you want to mention here. John, I'll kick it to you first. Any words of wisdom or ideas to wrap up the show here?
Just take it easy in the preseason. Have some fun with it. Throw a few chips in the middle and maybe you come away with something. There's a great time to be playing GPPs and not, I know a lot of people do like cash games. I try to limit my cash game exposure, but, have some fun, get back into the groove and, just get ready, get geared up for 3 weeks from now, because that's when the real fun begins.
Definitely. I can't wait for that. Ryan, parting thoughts.
Yeah, one last thing just on general strategy. I mean, if there's one position where I'm going to go for name brand and take a player we've all heard of, it's at wide receiver. They're less likely to get hurt than running backs, so they're more likely to be on the field. And it seems like when stud receivers are out there, they're getting their targets in the first 2 drives that they play and they're out. So guys that aren't on this slate this week but are prime examples. Mike Evans played 2 drives last week. He got 7 targets in 2 drives. He had 4 catches. 2 of his targets that were not caught were end zone, back shoulder fades from inside the 5. So these guys are going to get their work and get off the field. So would you rather have 2-3 drives of Mike Evans or 5 drives of Adam Humphries? So that's kind of what you got to think of at wide receiver.
Yeah, there's definitely some opportunities to find that guy who's going to score a touchdown in the first 2 or 3 drives for his team. Devin, parting thoughts, words of wisdom for our viewers.
Yeah, a couple things. So one, if you're not an Inside Pro Plus member, make sure you at least check us out. So we're announcing our product in full detail. I think we have some hints to it, but it's one of the best deals in across all the industry. You get 20, it's going to come out to about 20 articles a week of DFS content written by all 4 of us. Plus, I think there's about 10 other staff members that are writing. And then the other thing is don't play Malachi Rogers because he doesn't exist.
or don't stack him with Aaron Rodgers because he's not playing.
Yeah, exactly.
We try to insert little nuggets like that just, to make sure everyone's paying attention.
At least the information was right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good old Malachi Rogers.
That'll be a thing all year, won't it?
Yeah, yep. You just stumbled into it. Welcome to the show, Ryan. So be sure to check out footballguys.com, where we've got all kinds of content. Even the non-DFS content, like the training camp reports, are a great help to playing DFS. If you're already a Football Guys Insider Pro subscriber, you can add the Pro Plus subscription for just $15 more. It's $45 total for like all of our website content for the whole year. It's not a monthly fee. It's a whole year fee. So check out that great deal over at footballguys.com. We'll be back in preseason week 3 next week. We appreciate you watching this episode of the Power Grid for Devin Knotts, for Ryan Hester, for John Lee, and for Jeff Besquino, who'll be back next week. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.